Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. So, Apple recently announced there's new heart and health monitoring features for their latest watch. But today, I want to learn a little bit more about the transition from a reactive approach to healthcare, where we all wait for something to go wrong and then go to the doctors, to a more proactive approach to healthcare and remote patient monitoring, so patients can spend less time in hospital. So after reading a recent study that revealed that remote patient monitoring is expected to grow by 12.5% in the next 10 years, combined with another study that shows that almost half of healthcare providers believe that remote patient monitoring will be as prevalent as in-person monitoring within the next 5 years, I felt compelled to find out more. So today I've invited Waqaas Al-Siddiq from Biotricity onto the podcast to discuss remote patient monitoring, the role that technology is playing in healthcare, and much more. So buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way to California, where Waqaas is waiting to speak with us now. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, Neil. So I'm Waqaas Al-Siddiq, and I'm the CEO of Biotricity. And the company, we focus on remote patient monitoring for patients, and really our vision and what we're doing at Biotricity is all about really tracking cardiac patients through their journey of cardiac disease. So today we are in the diagnostic space, and our vision is, we think healthcare is going to become more connected. People are going to consume it on their own terms within their home and whatnot. And because most chronic conditions are not only the number one expense on healthcare systems around the world, there are also lifelong issues. There are no cures. And what ends up happening is companies will do one aspect of the care, but they don't really deliver care throughout that journey. And so at Biotricity, our vision is, okay, we begin at diagnostics, but what happens to this patient after they get diagnosed on our product is they continue on this cardiac disease management journey with their cardiologist. And we want to be a part of that journey and hold the patient's hand throughout. So that's a little bit about the company, about myself. I'm an engineer by training, engineer and economist, but also have degrees in a graduate work in engineering and business and a doctorate in business. And did the big engineering thing, left that, went into the investment banking thing. That, of course, caused me to have the entrepreneurial bug, left that and joined a couple cloud computing companies, did some successful exits there. But I always was connected to this idea that the future was about connectivity and collecting data. It's what I did in my graduate work as an engineer. And so felt that the future was really tied to that aspect, and most importantly in healthcare and how we actually live our lives and how that landscape is changing. And so started Biotricity.
And there's so much to unpack there. So with that background of engineering, investment banking, healthcare, a love of technology, etc., can you remember where it all began, what your origin story was, and how those worlds all collided and ultimately gave you that ethos that seems to be right at the heart of what you believe in life, about the using technology to be at the heart of connectivity and using technology to bring people together? But how did all that form for you?
Yeah, I know for sure. I give a lot there, right? So
yeah.
My passion, ever since I was a young kid, I was always into this idea of creating things. I was always into the engineering. So very early on, I was convinced that engineering was my passion, and that's what I wanted to do. And so, I started my education. I went to university a little bit early, so started education and focused right in towards the engineering space, and worked on computer engineering because, that's where I felt that technology and innovation and creativity was really happening. And so when I went in the engineering world and I became an engineer, I realized that, well, really the guys who are really doing the cool, unique things are really individuals that are focused on creating new products, right? New innovations and things like that. And so at that juncture, I was like, oh, well, maybe I should have a background and align myself with some business and economics and this kind of background. So I layered that in. And when I did my graduate work in engineering, I got interested in wireless technology. So that was kind of my specialty, and really got attached to this idea of sensors and monitoring. So that's where the original idea of monitoring came to fruition in my mindset. And so that was really the graduate work as an engineer. And then I sort of got disconnected to that and got recruited, 9 months before I graduated. I already had a job. So I got immediately recruited into IBM. Then I was poached from IBM to AMD, and poached from AMD to Intel. And so during this process, there were friends and other individuals that actually went in a different track, and people that knew me, friends, family friends and whatnot, and they knew that I was a technical person. They were in the banking field. And so they came and they said, hey, you graduated really well, and you're a top level engineer. We want your advice and input on certain investment deals that we're doing. And that was my entry into the investment banking. And so then I started doing a lot of consulting work and looking at deals and looking at investments, and came to the conclusion that, well, if these ideas are getting funded, I think I have better ones. And so that started the entrepreneurial journey.
Love that. And that path did take you to Biotricity, which is an incredibly cool name, by the way, which for people listening and hearing about it for the first time is a medtech company committed to improving healthcare with technology. But can you tell me a little bit more about how you're doing that? And also, is there a story behind the name as well?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a portmanteau. So it's, the idea of biology and electricity and combining that to make Biotricity, and this idea of collecting biosignals and biometrics from an individual and bringing it into the cloud for analysis and remote management. And so that's where that name originated from, and I came up with it.
Cool.
And in terms of what we're doing and what we've really innovated on, so traditional cardiac monitoring, and I'm going to oversimplify this, of course. So cardiac monitoring or cardiac diagnostics, you come to a cardiologist. So, I come to you, Neil, and I'm like, hey, I'm feeling bad. And you're like, well, that's great, Waqaas. You were referred to me by a GP. I don't know anything about you, and I don't know what's going on. So we need to do a diagnostics. And the traditional diagnostic is you put me on a monitor, which is called a Holter monitor, and you slap it on me and you send me home. It records my ECG from anywhere from 24 hours to 2 weeks. At the end of it, I peel it off, I stick it in an envelope, and I mail it back. And 2 weeks later, you get a report, and then you look at the report, and then you're like, hey, Waqaas, come back, and you make a treatment decision. Or I come back. So one approach is to mail it back. The other approach is I come back to your office, and then you take it, you give it to your staff, you download the data, and again, 2 weeks later, I get a report. So that's all great for low-risk patients. If I'm a high-risk patient, I can have a heart attack in 2 weeks, or if you include the time for monitoring, I mean, you're talking about 3 weeks turnaround, maybe sometimes a month turnaround before there's any insight into what's actually going on. And so what our device does is, our device is a smart device. It connects to the patient. So I come to you, same thing. You put a device on me, I go home, but now the device is recording and analyzing. And anytime it detects an anomaly, it transmits it to a call center, where you have nurses that can review that data, determine if it's an emergency, and then they can call you, and they can say, hey, Neil, or they can call my emergency contact or the hospital, and they can say, such and such is going on with this patient. What do you want to do? And you can have set criteria, you can have set thresholds. And so, I'll give you an example. And at Biotricity, we save lives every day. Just the other day, there was a lady that was woken up at like 3 o'clock in the morning, right? And it's like, ma'am, emergency contact, is your husband with you? She's like, yes. The husband, they were sleeping, obviously, but the husband's heart had stopped. So we got in contact with her, got in contact with the doctor, got the patient in. They had an emergency defibrillator installation, and the patient survived. I mean, the alternative would have been that she would have woken up and her husband would not have, right? And so that is really what we've innovated on and what we've done, right? Is this idea of taking a passive recorder and turn it into an active monitor. And what's interesting in healthcare, and I'm sure, if people and some of the listeners here, when we hear the term monitoring, even I find myself using it because it's the nomenclature and how we refer to it in healthcare. But it's most like 99% of everything in healthcare. It's not monitoring. It's passive recording. Actually, it's collecting the data, and then 2 weeks later you download the data, and then you get a report. And that's what we changed.
And it's so important, I think, because if we look at the traditional approach to healthcare, very often it was a reactive approach. You wait till something goes wrong, like you just mentioned, then you end up in hospital. And the first thing they do in hospital is hook you up to lots of machines and try and gather lots of data before deciding what decision to make next. And it would make so much more sense to be armed with that information before there's a problem, wouldn't it? It seems crazy that we're only just getting to this point now.
No, absolutely. And there's a lot of little technology components that have to be integrated, but you're absolutely right. And that's where I really see that the future is going as technology becomes smaller, batteries become, smaller, more efficient. But what's interesting is that, I give you an example of an event that occurred and we saved that patient's life. Yeah. So there are tens of thousands of patients that we have had from, Biotricity that have been on our product that we have actually impacted well in advance of an event occurring. So I gave you that example of an event occurring, but many patients, we're catching them way earlier before the event occurs. For example, a patient that has a stroke, if they're on our device, the device will trigger the alarm way in advance before a stroke occurs, because stroke doesn't just happen in one moment, right? There's this whole pressure of buildup, your atrial fibrillation burden goes up, you get into stress. So all of these things, they start gradual and then they kind of continue to increase, and then you get the event. Sometimes the events just happen, without this buildup. But in most cases, there's a buildup, and we actually trigger during the buildup. And so then what that does is that actually saves the system so much money. It saves rehabilitation costs. It saves the patient from an adverse event. When they have an adverse event, they have muscle damage and all that. All of that goes away because you caught it early.
And one of the reasons I was excited to get you on the podcast today was I recently read a new study that revealed that remote patient monitoring and that whole industry that surrounds that is expected to grow by 12.5% over the next 10 years. And then equally, I also read another study that showed that almost half of healthcare providers believe that remote patient monitoring will be as prevalent as in-person monitoring within the next 5 years. So I appreciate it's a pretty big question, but I'm going to ask you to look into your virtual crystal ball here. But what does the future of healthcare look like? What changes can we expect to see? And what role do you think Biotricity will play in that new future of healthcare?
All excellent questions. So let me kind of preface my comments with saying that, one of the things that we see is what is driving this growth? Why is this growth being driven? Right? What is the catalyst for all of this? Right? And one of it is the point that you astutely pointed out, which is that, we need to be not reactive. We need to be proactive, right? And part of that is the other side of that coin is that 70 cents of every dollar, and this is crazy, 70 cents of every dollar in healthcare is spent on chronic conditions. So it's not about the people who are seeing the general practitioner, getting their vaccines. This is not where the expensive. It's not the cancer patients. It's chronic patients, cardiac disease, sleep apnea disease, diabetes, kidney disease, all of these chronic issues. And what happens is, and why it costs so much, is there's no insight into what's going on with these patients. So in order for us to get control of our healthcare costs, it necessitates us, actually, it's a need, it's a requirement for us to get better insight into these patients in order to deliver them better care. And the only way to do that is remote patient monitoring. And that's what's driving that. And to your second part of your question, how do I see remote patient monitoring and its role, and how do I see the transformation of healthcare? What I see is that this whole area of the 70 cents of every dollar, this whole chronic area, we are going to see a huge change in how we deliver care to these individuals. And it's going to be all around this idea of empowering them and collecting data while they're in motion, while they're living their lives, to have a holistic view of that patient. And instead of them going into the doctor's office for checkups once every 3 months or once every 6 months or what have you, they're going to basically consume the bulk of their healthcare on their own terms and only go in for procedural work. And what's happening right now is they're going in all the time right? Maybe once a month, once every 3 months, because they've got some issue. Doctor has no insight, and in order for the doctor to track them, they have to call the patient in and basically take a survey, right? Of what's going on with you, how are you feeling, have you been taking your medication, whatnot. And so I think that the transformation of healthcare is going to go from this idea of the patient going in and out of the doctor's office a lot to not going in and out of the doctor's office and only going in for procedural work, right? Where they need an intervention, they actually need some sort of hands-on approach to care, and the rest of it will all be delivered remotely. And in terms of the third part of your question, which is how, what is Biotricity's role? Where do we see ourselves? What is my vision? Well, I kind of alluded to it in the beginning. Our vision is tracking this patient through that journey. So our first product is in diagnostics. We have 1,500 cardiologists that use our product over 23 states. Tens of thousands of patients use it on a monthly basis. But this is only for diagnostics. Once we've diagnosed the patient, they go into the rest of the ecosystem. And so what we're doing at Biotricity is we're creating, and we have a technology roadmap, a ecosystem that will essentially go from diagnostics, then go into disease management. So now the patient will have a simplified version of our diagnostic device available to them in their home. They can use that on a daily, weekly basis. They will be fully integrated with telemedicine, prescription fulfillment, virtual care services, long-term monitoring, additional devices that they can collect their data. And so what that will do is that will create a monthly summary report that the physician will have access to, and the nurses that the doctors has, so that they can get an insight into what's going on with the patient, and again, trigger if a visit or something else is required. And so what will end up happening at Biotricity is, whereas today we are just diagnosing the patient and really not seeing the patient until the next diagnostic or follow-up visit is taking place, we will be tracking this patient throughout that and deliver not one product, but we will have a suite of products to deliver basically a complete, complex cardiac platform that delivers virtual and remote care to the patient, everything that's not procedural based, if that makes sense.
It really does. And I suspect for a lot of people listening around the world, that maybe they know a relative that have had something go wrong and they've been given a device to monitor them for a few weeks. And maybe they see it as a big clunky device. I've seen some pretty, let's say, big, clunky and ugly blood pressure machines that are strapped to people. And there's other devices which monitor people's sleep, etc. So do you have any use cases of the kind of technology that you're using, what it means for the patient, and how it's improving patient outcomes and care? Is there any examples that spring to mind that would just help people listening visualize how you do what you do?
Absolutely. So our core product right now, which is the BioFlux, and like you said, many of these devices, even in the Holter space, they're bulky, big, convoluted, very aged. And so what we've done is it's the device. The device is the size of like a small Apple mouse. You hang it around your neck, and it's got 3 contact points, and it connects to your chest through a sticky electrode. And this is your diagnostic device. 3 channels. You wear it for a week. You sleep with it. You do what have you, and you get a diagnosis from it. If there's an emergency, of course, the device will detect. It's got built-in cellular technology, so it doesn't need a cell phone, no Bluetooth. It's got a cell phone inside of the device itself, so it takes a SIM card and it will transmit directly. So completely, self-contained and really enables the whole diagnostic process to take without intervention to the patient. And all the patient really has to do is charge it, once a day. And so this is a small form factor, tiny device that is able to do this, as opposed to the big bulky devices that you have, a few years ago or 10 years ago that you have to, and people are still using them. They have to strap onto a belt, and it's got long cords and 5 different contact points. It's a big mess. And then we've got this other product coming out, which is the BioHeart product, which we're going to be launching later this year. And this is taking all of this medical diagnostic technology and simplifying it and putting it into the hands of a consumer. And this is going to be a game changer, because now we've shrunk it even more. Now it's the size, it's 1.5 inches across, maybe 9 millimeters thick. And it works off of a dry lead strap. That's a personal device. So now you can wear this, sleep with it, run with it, do whatever you want to do. And it's collecting your heart statistics continuously, because continuous data collection is what is the future. And, you've got these things like Apple Watches and Samsung watches, but those you have to hold them. to collect 30 seconds of data. So there's no long-term data collection there. And so, in terms of a use case, we're going from something that is prescribed with the doctor. Yes, it's a very tiny self-contained device, but it still uses a sticky electrode. So there is still some, from a usability perspective, it's never comfortable to have something that's like I don't know if you've ever been to the hospital, but they put all those little patches and things like that. So if you have 3 little patches, it's still uncomfortable, but at the end of the day, you're worried about your heart. So you're going to go through that process. But once you've been diagnosed, now you have nothing. You have an Apple Watch for 30 seconds or an AliveCore device. So what we've done is we've built a continuous recorder, and that continuous recorder allows you to wear that, and now it's dry. It's just like a neoprene belt that you wear across your chest. You snap the device into it, and it will continuously record. And you can look at your statistics at any time. And so now your workflow and your use case is so simple and so easy, and there's no stickiness, there's no nothing, and it really allows you to be empowered to take control of your heart lifestyle.
And it's such an important point you raised there. I mean, from my own personal experience, my father-in-law had a heart attack last year, had a stent fitted, etc., went through all that. But when he got home, it was any slight twinge or feeling, he was terrified that same thing was going to happen again. So I would imagine that things like this also offer the patient peace of mind. And again, that's going to be one of the reasons you see so much more adoption, and presumably it's going to be a lot more rapid growth in the industry, right?
Absolutely. That's exactly right. And so you take somebody like your father-in-law, and what tool does he have now? He went through a life-changing event, very scared, family scared. And like you said, any little thing, and it's like, is something wrong? But how do I verify that? How do I get insight into what's going on? Diabetics have a glucometer. What do cardiac patients have? And it's the number one killer in the world.
Absolutely. And as you also mentioned a few moments ago about Apple recently announcing heart monitoring features in their latest watch. And yes, it's nowhere near as accurate, and you've got to hold it. And there's a whole other podcast episode to discuss there. But with all these different trends happening right now, does it really feel like we're entering a more proactive approach to healthcare rather than waiting for something to go wrong and then making an appointment, then trying to gather data and then trying to work out what's wrong and how to fix it? We're tracking so much now, from heart rate, blood pressure, calories, exercise. There's a lot of data there, isn't there?
There's a lot of data there. I think that the problem is that, today we have a lot of data. We're collecting a lot of data. But how that data is delivered to the physician in a meaningful way where they can consume it, that is tied to care management or like to actual care, versus people that are, collecting it on their own. And I think that gap still exists, and we've got the tech. Now we've got to we're at the last mile.
So what's next for Biotricity, and what excites you about the future of technology and healthcare? Is there anything you can share with us today?
Absolutely. So what's exciting for us and exciting for me, I think, over the next year, up until now, we've been really a diagnostic company, right? We've had a product, it works really well, it helps diagnose patients, but we really, we're working hard on this ecosystem and developing all of these products to really follow the patient through the journey and really, really create impact, because it's not just about diagnostics once a year, but diagnostics, coupled with disease management, patient engagement. And so over the next year, and then actually the next 12 to 18 months, which is what I'm very excited about, is we will be launching different aspects of that cardiac journey and different products basically every quarter for the next 12 months. And really tracking and trying to create this holistic view of this patient as they go from the diagnostics on our BioFlux to disease management, to our BioHeart personal heart management, to care management, and then being able to deliver virtual cardiac services through our connected network of cardiologists. So the next 12 months for me at Biotricity are incredibly exciting, because we're going to be announcing how we're taking this patient from the entry point of diagnostic, the entry point of cardiac disease, and supporting them and helping manage them throughout their journey, right? And so, you take an example, just like you said, of your father-in-law, and you say, okay, great, what happens now? And today, Biotricity doesn't have anything to really provide a patient like that, right? We can catch them, we can get them, we can support them in the diagnostics, but we're not going to see a patient like that for 1 year until their follow-up, where another diagnostics is required. So over the next 12 months, we're going to be announcing products that are going to track a patient like that, so that they are empowered, and we will really move the company from diagnostics into a cardiac disease management company, and really deliver multiple points of contacts and services to these patients and the physicians that service them. So that's what I'm super excited about, because, we've worked really, really hard for the last 2 years developing all of this tech. And now we are at the precipice of launch and really a transformation for the company.
Love that. Well, I wish you the best of luck for the future. It'd be great to get you back on next year and see how things are progressing, because things move so quickly in this space. But we did start today's conversation talking about your origin story, and I'm now going to ask you, what was the soundtrack to that origin story? Is there a song or piece of music that has accompanied you, inspired you, or just reminds you of your career in tech? If you have a song and a story to share with us today, we'll get that song on a Spotify playlist. But is there anything that springs to mind there?
Yeah, I know it's a unique question. I think the song that when I always think about entrepreneurship and I think about work, I always think about being in work mode, right? And what kind of music do I listen? And the music and the song that always comes to mind that really gets me super focused and energized, or what I listen to on a late night drive is an electronic song called "In My Memory" by DJ Tiesto.
What a great choice. Yeah, man. Certainly makes you want to get up and move a little bit and get your head in the zone. Well, I'll add that to our Spotify playlist. And for anyone wanting to find out more information about Biotricity, maybe look at videos of it in action and maybe even contact your team, what's the best starting point?
Yeah, but we're everywhere, so you can reach us at biotricity.com. Of course, we have an upcoming product at bioheart.com. You can reach us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter. We are on all the social platforms, and we are very responsive. So we'd love to have you guys follow us and track us, and we will be happy to answer any questions that come up.
Well, today's conversation for me meant a lot to me personally. Like you said, when you've had a family member that's had a serious heart condition or a heart attack and surgery, and then they come home and there's nothing to monitor exactly what's going on, it's bad for the patient, it's bad for the family, and it's hard to treat going forward as well. So it's certainly given me lots to think about today, and how remote patient monitoring and technology is going to continue to advance. But more than anything, just thank you for taking the time to share your story with me and everyone listening today.
You're quite welcome, and thank you for having me, and thank you for all the insightful questions.
I don't know about you guys, but I've learned so much about remote patient monitoring and the technology, and why it's poised for such rapid growth, and why remote patient monitoring is going to continue to improve patient outcomes and care, and what's next for the industry. And as I said in the interview, my father-in-law had a very nasty heart attack last year, and when he got out of hospital, that fear of any slightest twinge or anything going on was really difficult. Not just for him, but for the family and everyone looking after him. And I do think that in 5-10 years from now, hopefully sooner, we will question why nothing was monitored after the event when somebody's back in their home. And I think just wearing something that would give a patient peace of mind and feedback to a healthcare professional who's ready to act upon any data that looks alarming is a huge step in the right direction. But this is just one aspect of a huge topic that we've covered today. So as always, send your thoughts over to me, techblogwriter@outlook.com. And remember, if you want to work with me, my website is techblogwriter.co.uk. So thank you for listening as always. Hope you'll join me again tomorrow. And until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.